following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. Story 1. Call of the Tunnels. It was Josh's idea to explore the tunnels. He found the entrance one night on his walk back from the recreation center to the dorms. Emily, Greg, Amy and I were sitting around after lunch in the Oakland Center, or the OC as we usually called it, avoiding our educational responsibilities when Josh joined us and brought it up. "What's up, losers?" Josh said, snagging a chair and joining our group. Josh and I were in our second year as roommates, having hit it off since freshman move-in day. He was much more outgoing than me, and I'm sure I wouldn't have had nearly as much fun without him around. It is already a big step being away from the comfort of home for the first time, and being forced to live with someone you've never met could make the experience even more challenging. We were lucky that we got along so well. "We're thinking about going to the basketball game tonight. You down?" Greg asked him. "I've got a better idea," Josh said. "Let's meet in our room at 8 tonight. Wear tennis shoes, dress warm, and bring a flashlight." "What are you making us do this time?" Amy asked. "Don't worry about it. When have I steered you wrong?" "Have you already forgotten the Halloween party last October?" said Greg. "We drove for like 2 hours to get there, and there were only 10 people there, including us. Trust me, this is going to be amazing. See you at 8, he said and walked away. Emily looked at her phone. "I guess we have a few hours to kill before whatever adventure Josh has planned for us this time." "Most of the time he's taken us to fun things," I said. "The Halloween party was admittedly terrible, and the camping trip sucked with all that rain. But remember how much fun we had at the carnival? Greg, you finally almost got laid that night." Amy laughed. "That donkey really liked you. Didn't it take 4 workers to get him off you?" "Haha. Very funny," Greg said. Greg and Emily had been dating since high school and were sure to be married once they graduated. Amy was Emily's best friend, and Elle had a crush on her. I was working up the courage to ask her out, but waiting for the right time. Josh told me that there was no right time for anything, and you just had to be brave and go for it. But that's easier said than done. "Emily and I will pick up snacks for later. You better get to your accounting class, John. You're already 5 minutes late," Amy said to me. "Time value of money week," I said. No way I'm sitting through 2 more hours of the same examples over and over while the future communications majors ask 100 questions. "Hey, I'm majoring in communications," Amy said. "And you're great at math, right?" I said. "Shut up," she said, and playfully slapped my arm while walking away. After they left, Greg asked, "When are you finally going to ask her out? You know she likes you, right?" I had thought she might like me too, but that little bit of self-doubt would grow any time I felt like I was about to ask her on a date. We hung out a lot as a group and always had a great time together. I was worried that it would make it awkward if it didn't work out and I'd mess up our friend group. "What if I'm waiting for you to screw it up with Emily?" I replied. Greg ignored my attempt at humor. "I've overheard her talking to Emily about you. Trust me, she likes you. Grow a pair and ask her out." We continued our conversation as we headed back to my room for video games and a few beers before our unknown adventure. Josh entered our room around 7 with a brown paper bag and set it on his bed. Greg and I paused our game, looking over to see what he had. "Where are we going tonight?" I asked. "I'll tell you after we have our Boone's race," said Josh. "What the hell is a Boone's race?" asked Greg. Josh pulled out 3 bottles of Boone's Farm and handed one to each of us. First one done wins. Ready, set, go! He yelled as he twisted off the cap and began chugging the $3 wine bottle. Greg and I looked at each other, shrugged our shoulders, and quickly opened our bottles and followed suit. Josh finished first, followed by me and then Greg. That was probably a bad idea. Greg said after an extended burp. "You'll be fine," Josh said, and grabbed a blue light for each of us from the mini fridge. While we drank our beers, he regaled us with a long, overly detailed, but entertaining story of how he found the entrance to the tunnels underneath our school. Both Greg and I thought it sounded like an interesting way to spend our Friday night. We went back to playing video games, and soon enough, the girls knocked on the door and let themselves in. Amy came over and sat next to me, noticing the 3 empty bottles on the table. "You couldn't save any for us?" Josh went back to his paper bag and pulled out an actual bottle of wine. "Don't worry, we saved the good stuff for you." He grabbed 2 red Solo cups and poured a generous amount for Amy and Emily, and then filled them in on the night's plans. After the bottle of wine and a few more beers were gone, Josh made sure we each had a flashlight, and we put on our coats and headed outside. It was a mild night for April, with the temperature in the 40s. Amy huddled close to me as we walked through the grass toward the student center, all of us with a nice buzz anticipating the fun adventure we were about to embark on. "The entrance is over there," Josh said, pointing to a small section of pine trees and bushes. The night was still, and there wasn't anyone else in the area. We looked around to be sure no one was watching and hurried behind the bushes. There was a square metal door about the size of a manhole cover on top of a cement slab in the middle of the bushes. Josh opened it up and said, "Ladies first." "No way am I going first down there," Emily said as she looked at the ladder leading down into the darkness. "I'll go first," Amy said as she grabbed my shoulder and hoisted herself onto the cement. She smiled at me and excitedly said, "This is going to be fun." She turned on her flashlight and slowly went down the ladder. I went down next, followed by Josh, Emily, and lastly Greg, who closed the door above him before climbing the rest of the whale down the rungs. We got to the bottom, and the rest of us turned on our flashlights and looked down the 2 paths we could take. "How far did you go when you found this place?" Greg asked. "I went down this way a little," Josh said as he pointed to the right of the ladder. "I was only down here for a few minutes and thought it would be more fun for all of us to go." "Admit it. You were scared of being alone in the dark. I saw that nightlight in your dorm room." Amy chuckled. "That's for John. He needs to be able to find his pacifier if it falls out of his mouth," Josh joked back. Then he led us down the tunnel. The walls were rounded and grey, and there was a tiny bit of standing water in the ground. We walked for about 10 minutes before our flashlights illuminated a wall in front of us, with a path leading to the left and the right. "Which way should we go?" Emily asked. "John, why don't you and Amy go to the right and we'll take the path to the left? We can see which way looks more promising and meet back here in 10 minutes. Greg winked at me and grabbed Emily's hand and nudged Josh. Josh reached into his backpack, grabbed 2 beers and lightly tossed them to me. Then he handed Greg and Emily a beer each before opening one for himself and heading down the path to the left. After we started walking down the other path, Amy said, "If I didn't know any better, I'd think they were trying to get us alone together." I opened the beers, gave her one, and took a big swig from mine. "Well, there is something I've been meaning to ask you." Amy stepped closer and looked into my eyes. I hesitated for a moment and then leaned in towards her. She grabbed onto me and we kissed. Then she leaned back and smiled. "What were you going to ask me?" she said, biting her lower lip and looking in my eyes. "I can't remember," I said as we set our drinks down, and she pressed her body into mine. We held each other tight and continued to kiss, our tongues playfully dancing in each other's mouths. We were suddenly jarred out of our embrace by a loud crash. I initially thought it was Josh or Greg trying to scare us, before realizing the sound came from further down the path we were supposed to explore. "What was that?" Amy asked as the smile faded from her face. I aimed my flashlight down the path, making shadows dance across the tunnel walls. I took a few steps forward and Amy grabbed my hand, trying to pull me back. Let's get the others before we see what that was. I'll just go a little further and see if I can see anything. The high of the kiss and the buzz from the alcohol gave me extra courage as I slowly walked down the path. Another loud noise echoed through the tunnel from further ahead. I turned around to check on Amy and jumped as her hand grabbed my arm. "I didn't realize you were following me," I said. She let out a nervous laugh. "I didn't mean to scare you. I hope we don't get in trouble for being down here. Let's go find the others." I nodded in agreement. We headed back toward where we had split from the others. After a few steps, we heard a metal door slam shut. It sounded like it came from the area where we had entered. We stopped and she whispered, "Our phones. Let's try to reach the others." We both pulled out our phones. There was no signal down here, and the university Wi-Fi network didn't show up. My phone was on vibrate already, and Amy quickly silenced hers. We listened intently in the hopes that whoever was down here with us was going the other way. Amy grabbed my hand and we hurried further down the tunnel. I placed my hand over my flashlight to provide just enough light so we could see where we were going. "Look, there's a door up ahead," Amy said. The door was slightly ajar, but it wouldn't budge when I pushed it. I could hear the footsteps growing louder, and then it sounded like they were running. "Something must be blocking the door," Amy said. We began pushing together, but couldn't get it to go any further. I turned around and was blinded by a bright light shining on us. "Hey, what are you doing down here?" a deep voice yelled. We held our hands up to shield our eyes, and Amy said, "We're sorry. We didn't know we weren't supposed to be here." Then I heard Josh's laughter. "I got you guys good," he said. "You ass," Amy said. After Josh lowered the light, we could see Greg and Emily coming up behind him. "Sorry," Greg said. "We told him it was a stupid idea. But you know Josh." When Josh finally stopped laughing, he said, "At least I got you two to finally kiss each other." "That was before you scared us," I said. Amy turned back around to the door. "What do you think is back here?" she asked. "Something is blocking it." Greg walked over to help me and Amy push on the door, and we finally got it to open a little further. We took turns squeezing through the opening and found ourselves in a big room. There was a desk in the corner and a couple cabinets. "Maybe this is part of the basement of one of the buildings," said Emily. "From the direction we went, I think we might be under O'Dowd." "I think you're right," said Josh. He pointed his flashlight over by the door. "What the hell?" We walked over to him and saw the giant mound of dirt and broken concrete that was leaning against the door. There was a hole in the wall behind the pile. "We have to go in there," said Josh with a big grin on his face. The top of the hole was about chest height, so we'd have to crouch to get in. "No way," said Greg. Josh aimed the light in the hole. "Look, there's plenty of room in there. Let's see where it goes." I looked at Amy. She shrugged her shoulders and said, "Why not? We'll always wonder where it goes if we don't check it out," said Josh. "Don't be a giant." "Come on, Greg. Let's go," said Emily, cutting Josh off. "Where's your sense of adventure?" Greg sighed. "Fine, let's go." Josh went first. Amy and I followed behind, and Emily and Greg were at the end. The tunnel was well lit from all of our flashlights, and we only had to crouch for about 10 feet before it opened up into a bigger tunnel like the ones we first went into. Although this one looked much older, and the walls had rust stains all over them. "It stinks in here," Amy said. "My bad," said Josh. "I shouldn't have had those bean burritos from the cafeteria earlier." "No, it isn't that. Well, maybe it partly is, but something else smells terrible," said Amy. "Yeah, I smell it too," I said. "I think it is a dead animal." "Let's keep going," said Josh. "Maybe it will get better once we get past it." I covered my nose with my shirt as we continued on through the tunnel. The smell grew progressively worse, and I was ready to turn around when Josh said, I think we found the smell. We all aimed our flashlights where Josh was pointing and unfortunately got a good view of the large animal carcass. "What is that?" Emily asked. I didn't think any of us were going to be able to answer that question as I stared at the pile of bones and decaying flesh. It looked about the size of an elk, but you'd have to go over 200 miles north to see one. "Maybe it's a bear," said Greg. "How and why would a bear be down here?" said Emily. "It's way too big to be any other animal that lives around here," said Greg. "Maybe it's more than one animal," said Amy. "Aren't those all leg bones?" she said, pointing to a few different spots in the pile. Josh started counting. "I think I see 9 legs and I can't even tell what that is." He pointed to a large rotting appendage. "Let's keep going. I can't take this smell anymore," said Amy. We walked quickly away from the pile and only slowed down once the stench had begun to fade away. The tunnel continued for a long time, and Josh handed us each another beer while we continued on our way. "Look, there's another hole in the wall," said Amy. "Let's check it out before we keep going." Josh aimed his light in the hole. "It just seems to keep going," he said. Emily went first this time, followed by Greg, Josh, Amy, and then me. After a long walk down the dirt-covered walls, we ended up in a large open room. The ceiling was higher tooth than I expected, especially with how low the tunnel ceilings had been. I stayed with Amy while she searched around the room. The floor was dirt, but the walls looked to be solid. I aimed my light at the ceiling and thought I saw something move. "Did you see that?" I asked. "See what?" replied Amy. I moved my flashlight around the ceiling again. "There," I said as I caught more movement. Amy pointed hers up there too. "What is it?" she asked. I moved my light back and forth on the ceiling and saw that something was carved into the concrete. It appeared to shift and move when the light ran over it. "It looks like some kind of symbol," I said. "It must be a trick of the light, but it really looks like it is moving." "I see it now," shouted Amy. "That one looks like an eye." I saw the one she was looking at. It looked like a closed eye with long eyelashes around it. There were other carvings that looked like stars, and some with shapes or figures that were hard to describe. "I wonder what this does," Josh said. I heard a loud clang followed by the sound of metal grinding against metal. The ceiling began to shift and distort as the room started to shake. "That eye just opened," said Amy. I looked up again and the eye was moving around. It even blinked a couple of times before it seemed to focus directly on Josh. The other shapes began to glow and shift, seeming to float just below the ceiling. The stars got brighter and the ceiling got blacker, so it now looked like the night sky. "I think those are constellations," I said. "Look, there's Cassiopeia and Perseus over there." "Nerd!" shouted Josh. "Just kidding. That's pretty cool." It felt like we were standing in a giant planetarium, with the stars floating and moving just above us. If I reached above me, it looked like I could touch the stars. We were all mesmerized by it and no one said a word. I felt like I was floating through space. The eye was looking around again and seemed to focus on each one of us for a minute before it closed again. Some of the shapes appeared to move closer, and the sky-like ceiling began moving faster. Unknown constellations passing over us. I began to feel dizzy and had to close my eyes. When I opened my eyes again, I was startled to find myself in my dorm room lying on the floor next to Amy. As I got used to my sudden change in surroundings, I realized I was about to pee my pants. I got up and ran in the bathroom and just barely made it. While I was still going, I heard a knock at the door. It was Amy. "Hey, you almost done in there? I really have to pee." "Almost," I said, although it seemed like it was never going to end. Finally, I was finished. The door opened up while I was washing my hands and Amy rushed in. "Sorry, I can't hold it anymore. Too much beer and wine last night, I guess," she said. "It was the same for me," I said before stepping out and giving her some privacy. I checked my phone to see what time it was, but it wouldn't turn on. After plugging it into the charger on my desk, I looked around and noticed Josh wasn't in the room. Amy stepped back into the room and asked, "What time is it?" I looked over at my alarm clock. "It's past 2 in the afternoon," I said. "Really? I can't believe we slept that long." I didn't remember coming back here last night. However, I was afraid to tell Amy. The Boone's race was probably a bad idea, but I didn't feel blackout drunk. "Hey, do you know how we got here last night?" Amy asked. I smiled. "Oh, good. You don't remember either." "I remember everything until we were in that room." A smile came across Amy's face. The stars and glowing images came back to me and I closed my eyes. They showed up so clearly in my mind and I started feeling dizzy. "John!" Amy shouted. I jumped. "What is it?" "I've been calling your name for like a minute and you wouldn't respond," she said. "Sorry, I was thinking about the room." She looked a little concerned. "Let's go find Greg and Emily. Or Josh. Maybe Greg and Emily will remember." "Good idea," I said. "Let me see if anyone texted." I turned on my phone and waited for it to power up. When the lock screen came up, I was about to enter my PIN when I noticed the date. "It's Sunday," I said. "What Sunday?" she asked. "No, I mean today is Sunday," I said. "Let me see." She walked over to me. "What happened to Saturday?" "I don't know." I looked at my phone. Nothing from Josh. "I'll text him while we head over to Greg's." "No wonder we had to pee so bad," she said. We walked over to Greg's room on the other end of the hall. There was no answer when we knocked a few times and the door was locked. Amy and Emily's room was on the floor below. We were both quiet on the walk to her room. I was sure Amy was as confused and concerned as I was. Amy tried the handle. It turned and she slowly opened the door. "Emily." Emily and Greg were both lying on the floor asleep. "Emily, Greg," I called while giving Greg a shake. He started awake. "Hey, what are you doing here?" Then he looked around. "Wait, what are we doing here?" Before I could answer, Greg's eyes went wide and he got up and sprinted to the bathroom. Emily woke up slower, but then quickly got up and burst through the bathroom door. I looked over at Amy and she and I shared a laugh. When they both came out, Amy said, "Hate to break it to you, but it's Sunday." "No, it's Saturday," said Greg. "Don't you remember? We went to the tunnels last night and saw that room and then He looked confused. "Look, it's Sunday." I showed him my phone. "Does anyone remember how we got to our rooms Friday night?" Everyone shook their heads no. "Have you talked to Josh?" asked Emily. "Haven't seen him," I said. "He hasn't responded to my text yet. I'll give him a call." After opening my phone app, I noticed a bunch of missed calls from Josh. They were all from late Friday night and into early Saturday morning. "Anyone remember what time we found that room last night? Friday night?" I asked. "Maybe around 11, Emily guessed. "Josh started calling around midnight that night," I said. I tapped on my voicemail. "That's a lot of messages." "He left voicemails." "Play them," said Amy. I put my phone on speaker and played the first message. It was silent for the first minute. I was about to close it when I heard a faint sound. It was a barely audible hum. The tone of it was so low and deep that I could feel it in my head. The sound began to vibrate stronger in my head and was becoming painful. The glare of white lights appeared in my peripheral vision and I felt weak. Voices started to speak on the message, but I stopped it before I fell to the ground. It took a few moments for me to get back to normal. "Turn it off. Turn it off," shouted Emily. "It hurts. Why won't you stop it?" She was holding onto the sides of her head. Greg ran over to her. "It's not playing anymore. What's wrong?" Emily had her eyes closed and was still holding her head. She dropped to her knees and leaned forward onto the floor. Greg dropped down beside her. Then suddenly she stood back up. "That was weird. wasn't it? She laughed. Let's go find Josh. Emily walked to the door. I looked at Amy and shared the confusion I saw on her face. Emily, are you okay? Amy asked. My head hurt too when the voicemail was playing. I'm fine, Emily said with a smile. Come on, let's go. She walked out the door and Greg followed her. Amy grabbed my arm. What the hell was that? Amy said. She looked like she was in so much pain, and then she was fine. That was weird, I said. We had to move fast to keep up with Emily as we went outside and through campus towards the woods. Emily, do you know where Josh is? I shouted up ahead to her. She turned around and said, Of course I do, before trekking on ahead. We didn't say much else while we followed her. The whole walk, she never hesitated in the direction she went. There it is, Emily shouted before running ahead. We all ran after her and watched as she went into a section of thick bushes. She kneeled down and frantically brushed away the dirt. A handle was now exposed. Help me open it, she said. I was scared of what was happening, but I really wanted to see that room again and to know if Josh was okay. I grabbed the handle with Emily and helped her pull it open. Emily went down first and I quickly followed her. Amy gave me a weird look as I noticed her and Greg hadn't followed me over. I went down the ladder anyway and into the tunnel. Do you feel it? Emily asked. She pressed her cheek to one of the walls and closed her eyes. It is calling us back. She grabbed my arm and pulled me. Let's go. When I hesitated, she said, Don't you remember it? I'd forgotten about it when we woke up, but it all came back to me when you played the voicemail. I still couldn't remember what happened, but I also couldn't stop thinking about the room. Don't worry about it, she said. It will all make sense soon. She smiled and motioned for me to follow her. I looked back and saw Amy and Greg coming down the ladder, but I couldn't wait for them. I had to go with Emily. We ran down the tunnel and stopped at an opening in the wall. I heard some yelling behind me, but I couldn't tell what they were saying. The glow of the room drew me in, and all other sounds went away. I closed my eyes and felt the light beaming down on me from the ceiling. My body was so light, and I could swear I was floating off the ground. I opened my eyes and looked at the stars moving around me. The low hum I had heard in the voicemail reverberated throughout the room. It sounded so beautiful. I opened my eyes and saw Emily and Josh staring up at the ceiling. There was blackness all around us. The only light was from the tiny stars above us. It felt like I was spinning around. Then I felt something in my head, a strong pressure behind my eye. It felt like a bad migraine I had before, except without the pain. I looked over at Josh again, and he seemed so far away, I could barely even see him. Josh! I shouted, but he went further and further away. My eyes darted around for Emily. She wasn't there. I couldn't see Josh anymore either. My skin felt clammy and I kept looking around. The light faded away and I was left in complete darkness. Hello? Josh, Emily, I said to no response. It felt like something was watching me. I looked, all around in the darkness, until I saw a faint light in the distance. I don't know how much time passed, but it felt like hours. My feelings had quickly changed from awe to complete terror. Was I going to be stuck here forever? The light I had seen grew bigger and transformed into the eye we had seen Friday night. It became difficult to breathe as it stared at me. My thoughts turned to death and destruction. I saw my friends burning alive before my eyes, screaming in pain as their skin melted off. My mouth opened to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. Then I was suddenly soaking wet from freezing cold water. The bright light stung my eyes and I was shivering from the cold. He's awake. It was Amy. She slowly came into focus, and I found myself lying in a bathtub of freezing cold water. I jumped up, nearly slipping and falling before Amy caught my arm. Once I was steady, she wrapped me up in a couple towels. We didn't think you'd ever wake up, she said. What do you remember? The room, I said. I remember going back into the room. Josh and Emily were there. My body continued to shiver and my head was hazy. I sat down on Amy's bed and closed my eyes. I could suddenly feel myself back in the room. The low rumbling sound I had heard in the voicemail filled my ears. When I focused on the noise, it began to sound like words. Well, not quite words, but sounds. My head started hurting and I could feel the words inside my brain. An image started appearing in my mind. It was a vast ocean with water all along the horizon. Stars shone down from the night sky. Something big was emerging from the water. The giant shape neared the surface and I felt water splash into my face. I looked around and I was in Amy's room. Greg was holding an empty cup of water. "Man, where the hell were you?" he asked. "You zoned out again and we couldn't get your attention at all." That night, Greg went back to his room and Amy and I slept in her bed. She fell asleep quickly, but I couldn't get the images of my friends burning out of my mind. Story 2. A candle in the dark. Ever since I could remember myself, I was a cowardly person. Or, to formulate it in a lighter tone, I am prone to be scared. Living in a rural area with few kids around my age to play with, we all knew each other in the town, and our families were either relatives or friends. My childhood friends had noticed my fidgeting when we would go to darker places, the quickening of my breaths when entering an abandoned townhouse, or when going to the farms late at night to play hide and seek. While they picked on me from time to time, they didn't give me a hard time about it. They understood also that the world is dangerous enough, so having one person in your group who is too careful, keep the careless people in line. I was very good in games, throwing stones with precision on target cans, chasing, dodgeball. However, I was exceptionally good at hide and seek, and being a scrawny little dude, was easy for me to fit in unlikely places. During the day I would go exploring on my own, and at night I knew where the best hiding spots were that were not too dark or far from an inhabited house. Yet I could feel the fear once in a while. A sudden gust of wind whistling through broken branches would be enough to make me very scared. When I was around 8, I told my parents about my fear of the dark. They initially told me that I think too much of it, but as the months went by and they saw my everyday efforts to avoid dark corners and always having the lights turned on in my room, they grew concerned. They asked me on whether I had a negative experience in my past while being in the dark. I didn't. I always had this fear that, in the dark, no one is truly alone, that something is there always, waiting to drop my guard. My grandmother, who happened to be in the house during this conversation, she was looking at me concerned and, at the same time, nodding at me, as in a way to tell me that my concerns were valid. In the following years, I put a lot of effort in my academics and fitness. I signed up to a couple of self-defense classes that boosted my confidence in myself, although I still remained thin and short. This fear of the dark, while it lessened, it never vanished even when I finished high school and was about to study at a college a bit too far from my homely town. My grandmother, bless her soul, had visited us that fateful morning when I was preparing to move to the uni dorms. She asked my parents that she wanted to talk to me in private, and while initially surprised, they did as she asked and went to carry my stuff in their car. "My boy," she said with a calm tone, her brown eyes losing their usual joyful gleam, living alone in a dark, cold city is different. I worked in that city and other cities for many years to bring food on the table. You dear grandfather also was a hard-working man. He taught me how to protect myself. I never needed to use what he taught me. But he also knew that there was one more thing that made me scared. "Yes," she admitted as I looked at her surprised. "The dark," she continued as I didn't interrupt her, "has always been a fear for me. I never had anything bad happen to me in it, but it always made me wary. You know how some stories go. Demons, ghouls, ghosts, etc. We often hear that the true monster under the bed is human. But what if it actually isn't?" I nodded at her, my hands trembling a bit. Even going to a psychologist for this didn't help. Session after session, my fears got little, yet they still are there. She nodded at that. She gently took my trembling hands in hers. She was trembling a bit too. "Maybe I have an issue or a curse that I passed it down on you. My darling Lucas, we all have problems. However, a few years ago, when your grandfather was in his deathbed for over 2 weeks, he told me to keep the lights open when it was night, every single night. He never liked to have them on next to his bed, which is why I had a night lamp always on my side of the bed and not his. Right there, though, in that hospital room, he asked me that. I did so. He then told me he could sometimes see shadows in the hospital, and sometimes those shadows didn't neither natural nor friendly. Before he passed away, he gave me this cross to wear around my neck. It was a gift from his godfather. He told me, even during the war, that cross was his candle in the dark. He never took it off, and he always felt that it gave him courage. She opened her woven bag and took the cross out. I inclined my head, understanding. She wore it on my neck and kissed the top of my head. Ever since I wore this cross, I felt more at ease when it would be dark. I stopped using my lamp from time to time. The fear was still there yet. I felt as if your grandfather was next to me, guarding me against whatever was lurking behind the dark curtain of the night. May it be your candle now, a small reminder that dawn always comes even after the darkest of nights. I thanked her profusely and we shed tears of farewell. I love her a lot, and now I know one more reason why. She understood me completely. It wasn't easy getting used to the city life. Working part-time at a bakery and hustling through my engineering degree was taxing on my body. Yet, I had 2 cool roommates at the dorm, and we kept each other good company in and out of the dorms. I was on one hand, way of my surroundings, especially late at night when I could return home from a party, but I never got rid of my need for exploration, so I knew which routes and shortcuts to use at night, because I had already explored them during the day. One such route, however, was next to an abandoned, soon-to-be demolished hotel, while it was open for visitation as a soon-to-be demolishes historical landmark. That place gave me the chills since the first time I laid my eyes upon it. It had a very creepy vibe, the same type of vibe I felt towards darkness, only this place made me feel actually nauseous when I was near it, as if something or someone really dangerous was lurking in its shadows of the night. I tried to explore it during the day, to face my fear within its dusty beige and flowery decorated walls that started to smell of mold. Yet, that place was making me feel pure dread, even during the day. Its basement was the creepiest place I had visited in my life. Even during the hours of the day, I felt pure fear just being in there. In its grey walls and emptiness, I could feel a resounding presence. What also didn't help were the local news, which were reporting disappearances of people every couple of months near that area. Since I heard those news, I never went to explore that building again. I even bought a pepper spray can, just in case. When I had to go even remotely near that place, it was right in the middle of my quickest route back home from the city centre. Every night, I used a different route to go home after a party. Every night. Not that night 2 months ago, because that was when I met some monsters. It was a Friday night. The third-year engineering students at uni made a collab party with the philosophy third years. It was an interesting party and people really hit it off. My roommates, Josh and Chris, were also there, dancing and meeting new people. I was there just for the vibes. I had the next morning off at the bakery, so I just wanted to drink a couple of beers and chill. It was almost summer and we had no written exams except for written projects. To it was all good. I decided to stroll back home at around 02:30 a.m. My mates wanted to stay more so. I wished them a good time and went back on my own. It wasn't the first time I did that, and I never encountered problematic strangers on the way home. Not this night. I was halfway through on one of the paths I was using to go home. This path was dimly lit by a couple of street lights. Not many houses were around, only some shops that were closed for the night. I saw from afar 3 large-looking men nudging a person between them. When I took a closer look, I felt terror in the pit of my stomach. That person was a young woman, no older than me, under the street lamp. I could see that her hair were a mess, and something was trickling down from the mouth. Blood. One of those brutes were choking her strong enough to make her not scream for help. I was frozen stiff in fear. Quickly, I moved to the side, behind another street lamp. I sent my GPS coordinates to my mates and told them to call the police right now. Thankfully, they saw my message instantly. I then took pictures and a short video showing how they were dragging the poor woman with them, and I sent them to my friends. While I was about to call the police myself, I stood appalled and terrified at what I was witnessing. She was putting up a fight, and at one point, one of them punched her in the face. That's what took me out of my terrified state. That woman was suffering, and God knows what else those assholes would do to her. I couldn't rely solely on the police. Friday nights were the worst. The police department would have their hands full of burglaries and other crimes. It would take them at least 10 minutes to respond, and that might be too late for her. So, I looked around me and saw some large stones. I put some in my pockets and threw the largest one at the direction of the men. It hit the arm of one of them with a loud noise. As he turned around to see what was that, I threw another one that hit him square on his temple, and he dropped on the pavement, unconscious. "Come take on someone your size," I shouted, as I threw one stone after another at the other two, hitting him in the shoulder. I was good at aiming. Too many games of dodgeball taught me how to be accurate with my throws. The two assholes dropped the woman like a sack of potatoes on the ground and raced straight at me. I felt the adrenaline hit me, and before I realized it, I was running full speed away from them while glancing back and throwing them more stones. They were screaming in anger as they were approaching me, but I was speeding up. I could feel the vibrations in right pocket from my phone, but I couldn't answer right now. They were gaining on me, so I turned abruptly to my left and used a different path. That path was leading near where the woman was lying, and the third man was still down. I ran and saw that the young woman wasn't there anymore, but the man was still on the ground. She escaped, I thought with glee as I ran and ran in the routes ahead of me. At one point, though, I saw only one of them behind me. Oh crap. I then realized I was in the lot where that damn hotel was, and it had two ways out. If one of them was right behind me, the other was right across me. The lot had no other ways out. It was like a cage because of smaller demolitions that needed to be done in some service buildings right outside the hotel. I looked at the threatening figures gaining on me. I froze for a second. I could escape them by entering the hotel and exiting via the door in its basement. Yet I knew something dreadful was in there, in that basement. Yet I thought, if something dreadful was in there, I shouldn't be afraid. Not now. I needed to be strong. I lunged towards the hotel's entrance, my sudden change of course disorienting my pursuers. They soon followed after me. I was faster than them now in the dark. Under the dim city lights, I could see quite clearly in front of me. I followed the dusty corridor to my right and went down the only set of stairs leading to the basement. That's when I felt it. That's when I knew. Someone was in here. In the almost complete darkness of the basement, the only light that was entering was from the almost closed exit door. No windows, no lamps. When I ran towards the door on the right side of the basement, my feelings of dread and panic multiplied. There was a lock and chain on the door. I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. I felt the darkness around me like a thick blanket ready to strangle me, while also hearing footsteps on the floor above. The assholes were coming down here. In that moment, I felt as if my life passed in front of me. There was no way out other than those stairs. If I tried to use them now, there was a high chance they would get me while they would come down here. And if they got me, I was a dead man. I knew it. I felt my grandmother's cross over my beating heart. I wasn't alone. I felt a soft feeling of relief and bravery engulfing my trembling limbs. I took a deep breath and, in the pitch-black darkness, the city lights showed me a bunch of desks and chairs towards the left corner of the large room. Those weren't here 2 years ago. I ran towards them, despite an alarming feeling of fear that hit me when I looked towards the dark. Left-cornered, I hid in between some of them offices. They were large and heavy desks, and I found a small nook between two of the ones further to the front to hide in it. People in hide-and-seek always look for the furthest, darkest corners, not the up-front, obvious hiding places. I held my breath. I then took deep breaths to calm myself down. Beads of sweat fell on my forehead. My shirt was drenched. I felt the ground beneath me and felt something like a heavy brick. I took it in my right hand. If they were to find me or catch me while running away, I wouldn't go down without a fight. I took my phone out, texted my location to my friends, but I had no signal. Damn it! I checked my other pocket. I had a couple of stones left. Maybe I could use them to distract them. The steps got closer to the stairs. I breathed shakily, then slowly, then silently. My heart was pumping in terror as I saw the two men enter the basement. In that moment, my vision got darker, as if the darkness in the basement was thicker, heavier. I felt the cross on my chest become heavy and warm. I raised my left hand and, to my amazement and horror, I felt that the cross was almost too hot to hold. Something was very wrong in this place. The men entered the basement. One of them was lighting up the place and checking the desks one by one, while the other was guarding the stairs. I didn't think that far. They did. If they find me... The cross was now burning in my grasp, but I didn't let go. I was suddenly feeling all my senses to scream at me, to run away from something infinitely more terrible than those two monsters. "Come out, you piece of shit," the dude in front of the stairs shouted, gasping for air. "We will find you, and we will have our sweet time taking turns beating you up, little punk." His voice was deep and was threatening, but it didn't matter. I wanted to shout at them to run away. I didn't know what it was. I looked through the small crack in front of me. I froze. My limbs felt suddenly paralyzed. On the left corner of the room, from where I was standing close to a few minutes ago, was a figure. It was tall, abnormally tall. It was wearing a top hat and a tux, yet I couldn't see arms from the sleeves. It had its back towards the room, but I felt it. It wasn't human. Whoa. I heard the dude standing in front of the stairs when his phone's light centered on that figure. His buddy also audibly gasped. "Who the fuck is that?" one of them asked, and the other just shrugged his shoulders. The rooms felt darker and darker by the second. The light from their phones started to flicker. "Sir, we are looking for a scrawny-ass punk. He is our friend." "Is he a friend like that woman you were planning to have your way with a few minutes ago?" My body now was completely numb. My hand was on my cross and I felt it burn. It was the only thing that reminded me that this was real. That male voice was smooth, almost intoxicating to listen to, but it also felt as if it was a guttural growl from a beast. "Or that poor old couple you killed 2 weeks ago, or that young father you found near your turf and shot on the back. Should I go on?" The two dudes looked suddenly terrified. One of them pulled a gun out of his pocket. "Who the fuck are you?" The figure slowly turned, and that's when I screamed. There was unending darkness in those empty sockets for eyes, except for an alarming gleam reminiscent of the light of a hunter's moon. The nose was abnormally big and sharp, the face of the skin grey, wrinkled and decaying, and its mouth was terrifyingly wide, with countless black teeth forming a horrific smile that was pointed towards me. The men gasped loudly, one dropping his phone, the other looking towards my direction and then towards that thing. In the last flicker of his phone's light, the figure disappeared from the corner and appeared in front of the two now terrified men. As they started screaming and shooting at it, I saw that thing's upper limbs exiting the tux's sleeves, bony and black from rotten flesh, piercing the head of the dude with the gun. It then tore off the head and threw it to the side, while its mouth took a bite from the headless corpse's neck. The other man screamed bloody murder, but the beast pierced his chest with its limbs and dragging him towards it. Muffled screams and blood gurgling and bone crunching were the only sounds in the basement. The screams were soon gone. The gurgling was gone. The bones crunching sounds disappeared. That thing ate both of them, and I saw it all. Under the dimness of the city lights from the basement's door, and under the flickering of their phones' torches. Not even the bones remained, not even a drop of blood. I was trembling in fear, tears coming down my eyes. I was next. The figure stood. It looked at me, those horrific eyes piercing my own. I felt it hated me in that moment. That thing wanted to tear me to pieces. In an enraged voice, stripped from all the smoothness and the inviting tone of before, that thing growled, "If it wasn't for that thing you have around your neck, I'd have you for dessert." The figure disappeared in a black smog. I don't know how long I was in that nook. I don't know how many hours of shock my brain tried to process. It was way after 6 a.m. that I saw the light of dawn piercing through the basement door. I mustered the courage to crawl out of my hiding spot. I stood up, my mind hazy and dizzy, my limbs trembling from weakness and tiredness. I approached the stairs, not daring to look to my left. Not even a drop of blood was there, only their dropped. Crushed phones, their torches were still on. I left them there. I looked behind me, towards that corner. I could feel it was there, now invisible under the light of day, but waiting. Goodbye, Lucas. I felt terror again in my heart. It knew my name. I ran as fast as I could up the stairs, not looking back. I ran and ran and ran, until I reached in front of my dorms. I entered my room and my friends were there. They looked at me relieved and came to hug me. I hugged them back, crying harder than I ever did before. The terror gave its place in overwhelming relief. I don't remember how I got into the shower and then went to the police station to give a testimony of the events. I met the woman who was assaulted at the police station. Thankfully, she wasn't severely injured by those brutes, and she was already treated at the hospital. When she saw me, she rushed to come close to me and hugged me, thanking me for helping her. She had managed to run away to a nearby pub, and soon after, she contacted also the police. The police had already arrived on the spot where my friends had instructed them to go. Based on the coordinates I sent to them in that message, they arrested that man. After I left the basement and my phone gained signal, my friends sent them the coordinates of the hotel that they had just received. They also checked the hotel. Except for the phones, they found nothing from the other two criminals. I knew, though, as I recounted with the woman and the police the events of that night. I knew what happened to those two, yet I didn't say anything about what that thing did to them. No one would believe me. Those men were wannabe monsters who met their end by the hands of an actual monster. I am now in my room. The lights turned on. Every whistle of the wind outside makes me flinch and look around. Every shadow I see in the corners makes me terrified. I still remember those hollow, dark eyes with that horrible orange gleam. I don't know if I ever feel okay. But suddenly, I reminded myself, I looked at my left palm. The burnt imprint of my grandmother's cross was there, the only reminder of the reality of what happened, and the reminder that in my hour of need, in that thick, murderous darkness, I wasn't alone. I touched the cross over my chest, my candle in the dark. I pulled it towards my temple and, for the first time in my life, I prayed. I prayed in gratitude. I was alive. That woman was alive. The two criminals were dead. The third was behind bars. But the monster was in that basement, lurking, waiting for its next victim. I just hope that, when that building is demolished, that thing will stay in the shadows under the rubbles, forever. Story 3. Cursed Statue. Before telling about my experience, let me introduce myself. I am Amit. In August last year, I lost my wife Cheda and my daughter Gamza, my only princess, in a traffic accident. The car Cheda was driving went under a truck. After my parents' deaths, I thought nothing could hurt me more than this. I'm all alone now, believe me. I've never gone out in the past year except to go to work. I work in a quarry. Most of the time when I'm at home, I just stare at the wall and think about them sitting across from me. One day, I was browsing a second-hand product site on my phone. I came across the colorless statue of a very beautiful woman who was combing her hair. It strangely caught my attention. As I looked at the woman, it was as if I saw Seda. I immediately called the seller. Hello? Hello? Hello, I'm Amit. I saw the statue you offered for sale on the internet. If it is still for sale, I want to buy it tomorrow. Of course. I will text you the address. Okay then, see you tomorrow. After I hung up the phone, the seller sent me the address via text message. He wanted me to be there at 7:30 p.m. I felt like I was really going to see my wife tomorrow. A feeling I had never experienced before was swirling inside me. I don't even know how to describe it. I couldn't sleep until the morning. After work, I got ready and took my car with a box at the back and headed towards the address. I was driving by looking through navigation. I never opened it and looked until I started going to the address. The address showed a village 27 kilometers away from the city. I was starting to move away from the city. I started to see the signs of the village, and now I entered a path. There was a real gloom on the road. The trees were so thick and looked like they came out of a horror movie that they blocked out the sky and cast a slight darkness on the ground. When I finally entered the village, I took out my phone to call the seller. The village looked as if it had been abandoned. There was no one outside. As far as I could see, there were 6 houses not too close to each other. The houses were made of wood, and none of the lights were on except for one house. The seller did not answer my phone call. I pulled the car over and went downstairs. As I looked around in the darkness, I had the feeling that I was being watched. At this exact moment, my phone rang. The seller of the statue was calling.
Hello?
"Brother, I think you have come. I see a car outside." "Yes, I came. Where are you?" "I'll be with you in a moment," he said and hung up the phone. I put my phone in my pocket and took out my cigarette from my other pocket and lit it. While I was looking around again, I saw a black silhouette in front of the white curtain of the house in front of me, the lights of which were off. This image scared me a little. I think he realized I was looking at him and slowly ducked under the curtain and disappeared. It was getting darker, and the dimly lit street lamps were illuminating the areas directly below them due to their distance from each other. It was Amit, wasn't it? Startled, I turned back. "You scared me." "Yes, Amit," I said. "Welcome, I'm Recep. Let's go to the house right across the street," said, pointing to the house whose silhouette I had just seen. "Your village is very quiet. It looks like no one is alive," I said with a small smile. "Let's say they are not actually very hospitable. They don't go out much when they know someone is coming," he said with a straight face. We started walking towards the house and Recep started talking again. "This house was my grandmother's house. It wasn't long ago that he passed away. He was dealing with slightly different things. Anyway, I started selling the valuable things I saw in his house. She has no children other than my father, and I am her only grandchild. In short, whatever remained of him became mine," said. "My condolences, Mr. Recep. If you don't mind, there's something I'm curious about. What kind of different things did he do?" I said curiously. "You'll see it when you enter the house," he said sternly and unlocked the door. I stepped inside behind Recep, trying to reassure myself by thinking that what I had just seen in the window was some kind of optical illusion. There was a strong, musty smell inside. The items were really old. Some of the rooms had things hanging from the ceiling. I couldn't understand what they were, but from the moment I entered the house, I felt like someone was walking with me right behind my neck. "There it is," said Recep in a loud voice. The moment I saw the statue, I literally forgot everything. I approached her and touched her face. "How can you be so much like her?" I said. "To who?" asked Recep. "Huh? Well, nothing important. I just thought out loud. I guess," I said. Recep continued talking. "I have seen this statue in this house for as long as I can remember. But I guess my grandmother couldn't find a place for this statue. Every time I came, I would see it either in a different place or in a changed direction. Who knows what difficulties that old woman had to endure. Anyway, as you can see, my grandmother was the healer of this village," he said, turning towards my face. I just looked at him like I didn't understand, and he continued talking. "I always saw her making amulets for someone, protective things, although I don't understand much. She used lard, soap, little dolls, and always a piece of paper. I've never been someone who knows much about this business. She always said he did it to protect someone," he said, and put his hand on the statue's shoulder. "Just because I don't understand much about these things." "Really? How nice. My condolences again." "Thank you. Well, let's carry this to your car. You're taking it, aren't you?" Yes, I get it, I said and grabbed the statue by its feet. Just as we picked up the statue and walked towards the door slammed shut. I suddenly turned my head in that direction with a start. Recep motioned with his head for me to take down the statue and open the door. I told you, they are not very hospitable. They started playing games with us, said Recep. Is it a game? Kids? I didn't hear any footsteps. Maybe the wind blew it, I said, but there was really no wind blowing outside. Not the kids, not the wind. Jinns, he said, looking into my eyes and continuing his words. This happens every time I call someone to sell something from this house. They don't want us to take the furniture out of the house. They have adopted it all, he said in a flat and steady voice. Look, brother, I don't know much about such things, but if it means getting into trouble, let's not do this transaction, I said. Nothing will happen. Open the door and let's load this into your car, said. We loaded the statue into the car and I made sure that the lock of the back case was securely locked. I turned around and extended my hand to greet Recepi, but he wasn't behind me. He walked a little towards his grandmother's house, stopped, and had his back turned to me. Recep, you didn't take the money, I called out. He didn't answer.
Recep!
I called out again and he turned around and came to me. He reached out and took the money. Take care of yourself, he said dully and took a few steps back. You too, I said, and started walking towards the driver's seat to get into my car. As I opened the door, I saw Recep looking at me from my rearview mirror, one step behind me, and I quickly turned back. But he wasn't behind me. He was still standing in the same place and looking at me expressionlessly. What the hell kind of place is this? I mumbled and got into my car and started driving home. There was about 5 kilometers left until I reached home, and since I started going back, I had a deep sense of peace inside me. Finally, I returned home and barely dragged the statue and left it in my bedroom, right in front of the window. Her face was turned to the glass. I looked at the clock and it was showing 11:27 p.m. Not being away from home for a long time and carrying the statue really tired my body. I immediately threw myself into bed and fell asleep immediately. When I woke up to go to work in the morning to the sound of my alarm, my eyes first fell on the statue. Her face was turned towards me. I'm pretty sure I turned it towards the glass. How can this happen? Thinking that maybe I woke up groggily at night and turned it around like this. I got ready and went to work. 2. At night I went back to bed to sleep. A clicking sound coming from the living room caught my attention, but I ignored it and tried to sleep. I was about to fall asleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The statue was still facing me. She looked like Seda. I ran my hand over her stiff hair, turned her towards the window, and returned to my bed. But it's still the same feeling. I was feeling restless, angry, and many other emotions that I cannot describe at the same time. The living room lamp turned on and went off by itself. What the hell is going on? I said to myself. The lamp blinked again. I stood up feeling very frightened and started walking towards the living room. I stuck my head out and looked around in the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. I took 3 steps forward and turned on the living room lamp. It looked empty. When I turned off the lamp and turned around, I saw a woman's silhouette entering my bedroom with quick steps. "Hey!" I shouted and ran into the room after her. There was nothing in the room, but the statue caught my attention. She was looking towards the living room. Well, I didn't do that. When I turned back, I saw a silhouette walking towards me from the living room. I extend my hand forward. "Don't do that! Please!" "Who are you?" When I opened my eyes, I found myself in bed, sweating profusely. I looked at the statue. She was facing the window, and it was 03:27 a.m. I realized that I was dreaming. I went to the toilet to splash some water on my face. When I started washing my face, a sound of scissors started coming from the shower cabin with its doors closed. When I suddenly turned my head towards the frosted glass of the shower cabin, I saw a black silhouette standing behind it. I slowly pulled the door aside. Inside was a woman whose body was black from burning and full of wounds. She was cutting her dirty hair. When she started to turn her head towards me, I saw that it was Seda. She looked at my face and started grunting as if he was trying to say something. Seda, I said, surprised and scared. In front of Seda, my daughter put her burned body forward, just like her mother, and looked at me. Her eyes were completely black. I stepped back from the toilet and closed the door. I turned around and lifted my head. Jada screamed in my face. When I opened my eyes again, I woke up in my bedroom. The statue's face was facing me. It was 03:28 a.m. I heard walking coming from the living room to my bedroom. I immediately jumped up and ran to close and lock the door. Just as I was about to close my door, the bell rang. I was torn between whether to open the door or not, and it rang again. I started walking slowly towards the apartment door. I looked through the door hole and there was no one there. As I was about to turn around and go back to the bedroom, this time someone literally punched the door. I suddenly turned and opened the door, but again there was no one there. I shut the door. No matter what happens in the morning, I will taking the fucking statue back to that man, I said to myself and went back to my room. The fear inside me was now replaced by irresistible anger. I returned to my bed, kicking and punching the furniture in the house, and pressed my head into the pillow and started crying. I heard a knock on the bedroom door, which was open at the time, and I turned around. My wife and daughter were looking at me by the door. Their skin was rotten and their eyes were black. They were smiling at me in a disturbing way. My body was literally locked up. I couldn't even scream. I don't know how long they stood there, but when the morning prayer began to be recited, they turned around and walked towards the hall. After about 2 minutes, I looked all over the house, but there was nothing. I immediately loaded the statue into my car and headed towards the village. It was 07:02 a.m. when I arrived at the village. Which house does this guy live in?
Receipt!
I shouted as I took the statue down from my vehicle.
Receipt!
I don't want your statue, nor your money. Just take that back from me, I shouted. As I raised my head and looked around, something terrifying caught my attention. There were black silhouettes in the windows of each of the 6 houses, and they were literally watching me. Their faces or clothes were not visible, just black silhouettes.
Fuck! Enough!
I quickly jumped into my car and headed home. Maybe I'm going crazy, or maybe loneliness isn't that good for me anymore. But as God is my witness, I saw everything I experienced with my own eyes. After the incident, I called Recep, but the answering machine said there was no such number. Ever since I removed the statue from my house, everything has been fine, and everything is the same as before. Actually, in a way it is. Namely, every night after this incident, there is a knock on my bedroom door at 04:00 a.m. My wife and daughter are looking at me, holding hands with their rotting bodies, but they're not smiling anymore, in one way or another. I'm not crazy, and I still enjoy sharing my bedroom with my family. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.